Welcome back.
Welcome back, Research Works podcast listeners. Guess what?
What?
It is episode 100.
100!
Can you believe it?
Oh, honestly, I can't. It's a lot of episodes.
So many episodes.
Oh, my
and
goodness. What a milestone.
It's incredible. And I think we really wanted to spend today and this episode taking the time to celebrate that because, you know, 100 episodes is a pretty special milestone.
It is.
And not a lot of podcasts get to 100 episodes.
They do not.
So we're feeling in a celebratory mood.
Yeah, rather cheery actually.
Yeah.
It feels pretty good. I think when you get to 100, when you reflect on what that means, I look back and I kind of go from where we started. You were still pregnant when we first started this.
I was.
Then you went on mat leave and you're still coming in. And now kids are in daycare and we're still here doing it.
Yeah.
And it's 100 times we've been chatting to people about research.
And 100 times that we have learned from those people and heard them speak really passionately about their work.
Yeah.
And yeah, it just feels like a massive privilege.
It really does. It really does. And so we just really want to thank everyone for listening. You know, when we first started, honestly, Ash and I were like, let's just hope a few people listen to us.
That would be great.
It'd be really good because you don't really know who you're talking
download
to.
an episode. That would be a win.
Yep. And I highly encourage, if not force people to listen. I was like, you got to listen to the episode. It's so great. Please listen. And then it just started to grow.
It really did. And it, as it grew and it gained momentum and we were watching, you know, how many people were listening and downloading, it just felt more and more surreal. Yeah. And yeah, I just feel very lucky that I get to go on this journey with you, Dana.
Oh, same. Thank you. Absolutely. I couldn't imagine anyone else I'd rather do this with. I think I think even just thinking back to how we started is a pretty cool story.
It is. Should we? I don't know if many people are privy to that story. Shall we share it?
Should we share it? Yeah, I think we should. I think it's worthwhile because it makes me laugh every time I go back and think about that meeting we had at that coffee shop. And
That's right.
so I think the story is a good one. It was 2020, the midst of the pandemic. Because we started the episodes in 2021 in January.
Yep.
And I remember just talking to lots and lots of clinicians who were kind of like feeling really disconnected to research. And I kept saying, oh, have you seen this article? They're like, no, can you send it to me? And I'm like, oh, that's right. It's really hard to get a hold of articles or the time to actually find and curate it. And I remember going on a run. Most of my ideas come from running, I think, because I'm trying to like survive the run. And I was like, oh, just start a podcast. And it was as simple as that. And I was like, all right. So I remember calling you like, do you want to do a podcast with me? And you just answered immediately. You were like, yes.
Why not?
So that was September 2020.
Was it really?
Uh-huh.
Wow. Okay.
So it didn't take long for it to turn around.
No.
And then spoke to our producer, Ed.
Yes.
And I was like, do you want to produce a podcast? And he's like, yeah, I guess we could learn.
Yeah.
So then we bought all of our gear by October, named the podcast by November.
Yes.
And got all the
stuff. That was a great
stuff.
accomplishment, by the way.
It's not an easy thing to do. Come up with a name. And then we started to line up all of our speakers.
Yeah.
Which started in January 2021.
Yes. And I remember that we were too nervous to interview a real life person for our first episode. So we decided that we would interview each other. And that was a very safe place to start and kind of find our feet and work out how this whole podcast thing was going to happen. And then, but after that, the guests have just kept rolling in.
And it's pretty cool. We had some really big names right from the beginning. Obviously, we knew some of these people only from afar, kind of just went, Anna Novak, Andrew Whitehouse. You know, we had a lot of people at the beginning who obviously knew that they were at the start of something. There was no track record and they still said yes to come along.
In our humble little studio.
Should we describe our studio?
I think we should. In fact, there might even be some pictures on our socials of some of the early episodes that you can go back and have a look at so you can really get a visual of what we're talking about.
It was hard work, actually. So we had all of our gear packed in a suitcase, and we found it was like an office space that you could hire.
Yes.
It was a really cool office space, actually.
Up a couple of flights of stairs.
It was, that's right. Not particularly handy for what we had. The room was lovely but not soundproofed. Yep. And I remember producer Ed had to go next door to the people who were working next door who were swearing their heads off about something, and we're like, we can't quite record this right now.
It was a very passionate conversation.
I remember that. That wasn't a great deal of fun.
No.
There were a lot of F-bombs that were hit that time. But
they were very quiet after
their visit
from producer Ed. Though.
Yes. The aircon was particularly loud. So January is the depths of summer here in Perth, Australia, and it's so hot. But the aircon was so loud that it sort of wasn't great for recording.
No.
So we had to turn it off, and we were just a sweaty mess. Welcome to the guests. Sorry about
Sweat
the temperature.
pouring off our face. It's fine.
Oh, gosh. And we had to book it. It was actually quite tricky. You had to book it and know when the guests were coming. And then from there we moved to another sort of a lecture theatre.
That's right.
We had this massive lecture theatre, and we just sat at the front.
Yes, on a tiny little table at the front.
Yes. And the internet wasn't so great, so we used to have to hotspot off our phone for the Zoom links, and we had to put my phone on the other side of the room where it was closer so that we had an internet connection. And every time there'd be some sort of funny sound, we'd be like, connection, are we okay?
And people used to pop their heads in, just have a look.
We're like, no, go away. Yeah, no, that was really fun. And then when we finally had our studio here, everything's all set up.
It is. It's a beautiful
nice.
studio, testament to all of your hard work, Dana.
That's a lot of that's probably more producer Ed. Got it all soundproofed. But yeah, no, it's really great to see how it's changed over the time. But the funny story about the cafe is Ash and I met in December of 2020, and for some reason both of us had really bad sinuses because we had really bad hay fever. So we met at this cafe, we're looking at each other, these red noses and really blocked up.
Yeah,
and we're like,
very nasal.
We need to fix this before we start recording.
This is not going to make a good podcast.
So before we started the Christmas holidays, we're like, okay, we're going to be really committed to find a solution so we can clear our sinuses. And we did, and we've been good.
Yeah. There's been peaks and troughs in the sinus department, I think, over the course of the podcast, but we've managed to keep a lid on it.
That's true. There'll be a few moments where it's like, it's more like the clearing of the throat and things like that. But we've learnt along the way.
We have no coffees before recording.
No coffees. Yep.
No.
You get that bowl of phlegm at the back and you're in big trouble. You know it's about to happen.
Yeah.
Tea is okay, no milk.
No.
Or just water.
Yeah,
we've learnt that part of it.
We've learnt a lot.
But yeah, so that's the 100 episode journey. But I thought we had a few things that I thought would be really great just to celebrate as well. Because I think the most recent one was really cool.
Yes, and I watched from afar as you completed what I have decided has been the podcast marathon, the equivalent of a marathon in podcasting, which was your time at the EACD conference.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about that because I've listened to all of the episodes.
Oh,
Tell the listeners how many were there?
27.
27 podcasts.
27
episodes in how many days?
2.5 days.
That's incredible.
It was pretty mad.
Yeah.
It was pretty mad, but it was amazing.
I have PTSD from that.
Yes. Because not only was it 27 podcast episodes in 2.5 days, it was then the post-production of 27 podcast episodes in how many days, Ed?
Well,
we tried to get them out straight away. So whatever was recorded that day came out that night. Yeah. So sometimes it was an all-nighter to get them done, but it was worthwhile. It was worth it.
It was just so impressive. So talk to me and talk to our listeners about EACD. What are your reflections on the conference, on the guests that we had on the podcast during that time? What did you come away with?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say, which I think was the running joke through the whole thing, but it was genuine and real, is I'm terrible at pronouncing names. And I struggled every single time, and I just wish that Ash was there with me. I was like, Ash, I can't do this. This is definitely your strength, amongst many, many other things.
No.
But I felt like, every time I'd sort of about to introduce someone, I'd sort of panic and I'd look down at their name and I'd be like, oh, I don't know where the accent or the emphasis on their name goes. And I'd say it. And what I realized was so beautiful was, we are so fortunate to go to a conference where everyone speaks English, but a lot of people, English isn't their first native language and they present scientific work in another language. I was blown away by that. And that's all in the name of knowledge translation. Like
Absolutely.
It's incredible. So everyone was very forgiving. They were so kind. I'd often say, was that okay? They're like, yeah, that's
Kind of,
good.
yeah. At least you didn't get a good try.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. But I can't roll my R's. I don't have this, people just have the most beautiful accents. But look, jokes aside with that, what I thought was incredible was the common themes. I felt like I was doing a thematic analysis.
Yeah.
All the time because I'm hearing what people are
proud.
saying. I know. I thought you'd be really proud of me because I'm just like listening to one thing going, that's what these guys are saying from this country. And you sort of drawing it all together. And, the common themes are goal setting's important regardless. You do it. We're talking more and more about the ingredients of effective interventions, less about the names of interventions because they can always be renamed. But if they contain the ingredients that don't work, they truly don't work.
Yeah.
There's a really clear divide between old ways of thinking and new ways of thinking, and really that's based on science, and there's a real push for that. Participation, technology, it's just it's amazing that from a global perspective, we're all talking about the same things. It's really cool.
That
actually.
is.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And what was the most memorable part of the conference for you?
The most memorable part of the conference. Look, I would actually have to say one of the first few keynote speakers, they talked about the effect of war on people with disability.
Oh, wow.
And we really don't get a chance to hear that.
No.
We know that war, conflict is terrible for everyone and anyone involved. But the minute you have a child with disability or the effect it has on women, because, the men are often off fighting the war. And if you have a child that's immobile and you have to look for services and support to stay alive, it's pretty confronting. And I thought for that set the tone of the whole conference, I thought. And it makes you really pluck out what's important.
Yeah.
There's a lot of frills sometimes, and I think it just plucked out what was important. And one of the keynote speakers of that, Ruslan Vastilin, I think so. I think I was kind of close.
I'm going to say that's not quite close enough.
His name was Ruslan, but I can't say his surname.
I think.
Huh?
Vasyutin? I think there was a Y in there.
Okay.
Good try.
Good try. And he told the story about how they fled their home to find safety.
Oh, my gosh.
And I wasn't quite prepared for that. And, that was I actually had goosebumps. I was looking at him and going, what on earth is this? How can this be happening right now? So that was really memorable, and his insights as a parent during that kind of time.
Wow.
Again, that has just had a lasting impact.
That's such important perspective, isn't it?
It is.
To carry with you. And I think, we live in Australia in a very privileged position within Australia, and it's just
perspective.
Absolutely.
It's so, so important. And I think the other part that I just loved, obviously just meeting so many people, but it was also meeting people who've been listening to the podcast from all different places in the world. It was
that's so
incredible.
lovely.
And some people in really sort of remote areas. I met a lovely lady from Russia. Make sure you do send in your email to me. Get in touch, please, if you're listening. And she was just sort of saying that this was an avenue where she gets a lot of information.
Wow.
Because it's so hard to access it.
Yeah.
And I heard that countless times. So that was really cool.
Oh,
yeah.
The podcast is doing its job.
It is. That's right. Yep, absolutely. So, so that was EACD. It was a lot of episodes.
And then did you have a nice big nap afterwards?
Did indeed. Yeah, that Sunday after everything had finished.
Yeah.
It was just sleep. And I felt like I became really short-sighted because I was looking at someone so close to me for so much of the day as we were interviewing, and it was just running around to the keynotes and going, I almost forgot to go to my presentations.
I was just about to say it. The fact that you recorded 27 episodes in 2.5 days is as I said, the podcast marathon in itself, but you didn't just do that while you were there. You actually had your own presentations and posters and things within the conference that you were engaged with. So you almost missed a presentation.
Look, it wasn't on my mind at the time. I was like, well, I'm meant to be somewhere right now. I didn't stand next to my poster at any point because I never got the chance to, but I did present, and it was lovely to also share work that we had been doing as well. So, and that's what it's all about. You know, it's about being together and sharing knowledge, and the podcast is just an avenue for us to make sure that people who've attended can have something that they can remember it by, because you can't remember everything.
No.
People who couldn't attend because of travel and all sorts of things, they can still feel like they're part of it, part of the community.
I certainly felt like I was part of it.
I really missed you there.
I missed you. Next time.
Next time indeed.
Yeah.
But I thought as well, now that that was a big sort of milestone, I think, for the podcast is going international. And we knew we could do it because we put everything in a suitcase.
Yes.
Which is kind of like how we started. Yeah. We could set it all up while we were there.
You were well practiced the art of suitcase podcasting.
Yeah, that's right. Going back to the humble beginnings, which was really lovely.
And it all got back.
It all got back.
Which is great.
Thank goodness. I have to say, there was the flight on the way to Slovenia. I sat right by the window and I could see the luggage being loaded. Oh. And I was like, I haven't seen my suitcase yet. And so the minute I saw the podcast one go on with a big heavy sign on it, I was like, that's fine. My suitcase with all my clothes has gone on, but it doesn't matter.
It doesn't
matter as long as the podcast stuff is on.
Yeah. And did they place it gently?
Relatively. Not as gentle as I'd like it to, but it all arrived fine. So I was really grateful.
Good.
So I hope everyone's been enjoying those episodes. I've been seeing, it's been like the downloads have been crazy. It's been thousands.
Wow.
So it's I hope everyone's been enjoying. So thank you for listening. And but I thought in this episode at 100, you've asked me a bunch of questions, but I thought I'd ask you some questions. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I feel like it's really funny because when I went to the conference as well, people were asking a lot of questions about me. They're asking a lot of questions about you, and they love the icebreaker questions, by the way. Yeah, they really, and I think people feel like they've gotten to know us.
Yeah.
And our singing and, you know.
Oh, they like that?
They didn't comment on it, but they just commented on the singing.
We'll assume.
We'll assume they really like it. And so I thought, well, let's go a little bit further because I think people do listen and they hear our voice and I think it's quite familiar, but it's, you know, it's the person behind it and what brings, you know, this is why I missed you as well, but it's more than just the fact that we do the podcast. But I thought a good first question would be, how did you get into this world of research?
Oh, okay, a curly one.
Cast your mind back.
Many years. Many years. So
not that old.
It's my 20-year high school reunion this year. That's a side note. We can talk about that another time.
It would be a good icebreaker question for the latter. Have I attended any before? No.
Okay. How did I get into research? It's a tricky one because there was no kind of clear linear pathway for me in terms of a research career. So I started off, when I was young, I wanted to be a vet.
That's right.
And my granddad, who is a horse trainer, he said, don't be a vet because horse people don't pay their bills. So that's not going to – sorry to any horse people out there. So I thought, okay.
Good advice.
And you know, and as you get to learn more about what being a vet actually entails, you know, that very quickly realised that was not for me. I could stick to loving animals without
all the other
looking
bits.
after them in that way.
Yep.
So when I went to school, I was always really sporty, and I thought something that would align really nicely with my love of sport would be to do a sports science degree when I finished school. So got into a sports science degree, loved that, like just absolutely loved everything about it, you know, engaging with people, going on all the pracs, learning about anatomy and biomechanics and all the different things that you get to do in a sports science degree. But I've always been a really curious person as well. So I'm always the one asking questions and asking too many questions, probably, my family members would say. So after I finished my degree, one of my lecturers said, you know, I think maybe honours would be a really good idea for you because you get to ask those kinds of questions in a really scientific way, and that really appealed. So from there, I went on to do a PhD, and just, my love of research and learning new things and understanding things in depth evolved. And I think, the more you learn, the more you realize you have to learn. So it's just kind of snowballed from there. Yeah. And, when I finished my PhD, I got to do some work on a funded research project. And then one of my PhD supervisors tapped me on the shoulder and said, we've got a job opportunity I think would be really great for you at Perth Children's Hospital. And I haven't looked back.
So curiosity is what brought you here.
Absolutely.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's a really cool story. And I love how you didn't really have like a clear sort of end game involved, but you just sort of followed. You always talk about follow the evidence. You're sort of following one thing and to the next, and it just led you in this direction.
Yeah. And I think, my career is probably a bit different from others. In lots of people in academia or in research, they have a particular topic or population or intervention that they like to try and understand in depth. Yeah. Whereas for me, it's about learning different ways that we can answer scientific questions. Yeah. So I end up doing have lots of different roles in lots of different projects because for me, it's all about learning and understanding and then learning some more. Yeah. Yeah.
And you can see that in the work that you do and what you're involved with. You're definitely my go-to for a lot of things. Definitely qualitative. That's definitely a strength, obviously, but knowledge translation is all part of that. So you've got very multi-skilled in all those areas.
What about you, Dana?
Oh, for me, got me into the world of research. It was by total accident, but also curiosity. It was the same thing. So it was a physio. Got really annoyed one day when I was looking into something, couldn't find a solution. So for me, it was children with cerebral palsy who are GMFCS level 1 and 2. Just felt like, they could walk and everyone was like, oh, that's good and that should be good enough. But you kept hearing about their problems in terms of tripping and falling. There weren't really many great solutions. Kids didn't like wearing their ankle foot orthoses, yet that was the only option. And then I started just looking to some other ideas that brought me to functional electrical stimulation. And then finally I was like, that's it, fine, let's just look into it then, look at it properly. And I did my first study, and that it's just sort of happened from there. And I think what's happened for me is, as a physio, I've actually grown up with all the kids that I see. Like I still see a lot of them now. Yeah. So I feel like my research follows their life trajectory. So when they're younger, these are the problems that they often see. We look into literature, what is there, what isn't there, can we fill a gap? And as they get older, and I think that's why my area is so much into sort of mobility, physical activity, health and well-being, because that's so important for our kids. Especially function at 4 and 5. Yeah. So that's why I think I've become sort of a lot in that space, because those are the families asking me lots of questions and I can't answer them for them. Yeah. And so that's how that all happens. Just curious again.
Yeah. Curious, but also I think a lot of what you do is, like you say, driven by the families that you work with. So you're always asking the questions that are important scientifically but are important to families. Yeah. So I think, that's a really authentic demonstration of involving people in your research.
Yeah. I remember going to my first talk about that when they're like involving consumers, and I'd sit there and I'm like, yeah, I think that's what we do. Yeah. Because it was just that's how you can translate knowledge as well, because you have the problem right there. You develop a solution, you test it out, and then you make sure it's available. It's really seamless, but you need to do it beyond your clinic. You need to do it beyond, the service as well. So you've got to go a bit beyond that as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Not just research for research's sake.
Yeah. Which I don't think I could do. No. I don't think either of us are made that way.
No. Definitely not.
Like that. Well, I've got another question for you.
Oh, okay.
So in your current role, what is apart from the podcast, what is the best thing about what it is that you do?
Ooh. Oh, there's so many.
I mean, because I've taken away the podcast.
Okay. I'd say there's two. Uh-huh. The first one is getting to be involved in the consumer reference group that we have that is part of our department, and getting to speak with parents and young people with lived experience who just have the most incredible ideas and feedback on how we can make things better for them, but also the families that are to come through our service. So I absolutely love the chances I get to speak with them and learn from them.
Yeah.
And the other part that I really love is getting to work with clinicians who, you know, use research in their practice, but perhaps don't feel confident to go on the research journey themselves, and working with them to, you know, help them learn about how they can best answer the questions that they're curious about. So I really love that part as well.
That's cool to be able to facilitate that. And like one of the episodes at the EACD, I interviewed Professor Rosalyn Boyd, and one of her pieces of advice, which was great, was, you know, get yourself a mentor. Like you always need someone that's going to help take you on the journey, and what you do for clinicians to kind of go, okay, let's try to find, you know, an avenue that makes sense to you and it feels like comfortable for you, and just because if you can get clinicians involved in research, we start answering some really important questions too.
And just making it seem less daunting. You know, just one step at a time. And
you don't have to do a PhD for it to be valuable.
No, absolutely not.
So much you can do.
Yeah.
No, I really like that. And what do you find is like the most challenging part of it? Because I don't think we talk about the challenges as much. There's always like the highs of, you know, being able to go to a conference and being able to finally publish something. But there are some significant challenges being a researcher too, which I think people can relate to.
Definitely. I think one of the biggest ones is just constantly working to find ways to make your team sustainable. You know, finding that next grant or the next, you know, pot of money that's going to mean that you can keep postdocs on and, you know, get PhD students or transition a PhD student into a postdoc role, and, you know, supporting people to progress their work and their careers. It's a big responsibility, and I think it's, something that plays on your mind, because it's not just about the research, it's about the people that work in
and
research.
You tend to have to think about that from I think that way. You kind of go, okay, I've got a grant that lasts for this many years. I can keep this many people on for this time, and then it'll come to an end. So I can look for a grant that sort of can start before that so it can sustain. And it's a constant thing, writing grants. It's quite a constant thing.
And I think trying to balance out, you know, answering questions scientifically, but in ways that are meaningful and appropriate for the families that you're working with as well. You know, sometimes in research we can ask a lot of families, and, you know, sometimes to answer a certain question there's, you know, scientifically there's ways that you have to go about that, but it's just balancing all of that out, and that's where the role of consumers becomes really important in terms of, you know, trying to work that out before you even get started, is whether this is going to work for them.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, it's nice to know what makes you tick, what keeps you going in all these roles as well, because obviously you've come back to this you've got 2 kids, which you've spoken about on the podcast before. So it's a lot of balancing, but you know, you seem to make it work.
Yeah, try to. Well, it's good that I seem that I do. Sometimes it feels like, you know, all the plates are kind of spinning out of control. But
I think you're amazing.
Thanks,
it's a lot to balance.
I think you're amazing.
We got to 100. This is how we did it.
We did. So I'd love to hear from you though. What's the best thing about your work and what you do besides the podcast?
Besides the podcast? Well, I don't know if many people know. I don't talk about it a lot. And I know that when sometimes I guests bring it up, I'm like, oh, that's right. So I started the Healthy Strides Foundation 5.5 years ago now. And that came from research. I reckon that's probably the best story ever.
It certainly is. I remember coming to the grand opening.
Oh, it's so cool, isn't it? Oh, so good. And so it came from a study that was a postdoc, I guess. It was just after my PhD, and I was looking at locomotor training, which is the topic of our first episode.
Yes.
And the qualitative study, which we did after, which was the first episode in the second season. So we, worked with these families, and it was just so important to them to have it continue beyond the community. And it was literally their call to say, hey, how about you make this available beyond research? And I just remember having these real just vivid thoughts and almost visions of what it could look like. And over the course of a year, I just did the planning for it. And it's a big story. I'm writing a book in case anyone's ever interested in it, just because I think it's a cool story.
It's an incredible story.
How it's come together. And so for me, the fact that I've seen Healthy Strides grow from a really tiny 80 square metre space with 5 people from the research team now grown to this 850 square metre space, it's a not-for-profit, and we've worked really hard for it. And it's the partnerships that we have from so many people, but we've worked hard for it too. And we have a team that's really proud of it. And so what I'm most privileged about is this interaction between clinical and research. And that's what I've always wanted. I've always wanted a place where we spend the time doing the research, but spend the time doing the clinical practice, which is the cutting edge of research, and always keeping that true, but also generate new evidence. And it's just that dynamic, being able to like shift and follow and make things happen and hopefully make an impact. Yeah. It is so cool.
It is. And
it is really cool.
Every time I hear you talk about Healthy Strides, whether it was 5.5 years ago or now, you speak with the same amount of passion and drive and love for the foundation and for what you do. And I think that's just so impressive.
Oh, thanks, Ash. Like I love it. I never thought I'd live this life. And I always thought that I'd stay at the hospital, work at the hospital. It was a great place. It was amazing. But I had a heart for being in the community, go back to the grassroots, and the kind of team that is coming through now, really proud of them. Yeah. They're, growing leaders, mentoring them and seeing them be at their best, and then seeing kids reach their goals and integrating research into their clinical practice, which is something we'll talk about one day when we're, when we've got some more results for it. Oh, it's very awesome. So it's always growing. And so the podcast is only made possible because, we do it within Healthy Strides, and it's a healthy place for us to be able to do it from and get the word out there. Yeah. So cool. I love it.
All right. Well, let's throw a slight curveball then. What's the most challenging thing about your role?
The most challenging thing, I think, would be having the confidence, I guess, sometimes to speak up about things that, when you work so closely with families and you see how much time goes into, helping their children, coming to sessions, the time they take off work, they want their children to grow and flourish and be the best version of themselves. And it's our responsibility to meet that need with the knowledge that we have. Yeah. And so for me, that's evidence-based. It's just 100%. There's no other way around it. And so when I see practices that's been really heavily promoted and marketed that we know are not grounded in any evidence, there's no research behind it, I just can't be silent. I just can't. And so it's the confidence to speak up and to just say it. It's not to condemn families from doing it at all, but I truly believe in informed choice. But sometimes speaking up can be really confronting because, these are on the other side of who's carrying it out. They're people and they really believe in what they're doing, but it's still not grounded in science, and it just needs to be brought up. And for me, it's an ethical thing. Yeah. And so I find that probably the most challenging because it's all good to talk about research and it's fabulous, but the flip is if you don't follow it, what does that mean? Yeah.
And it is, those conversations are challenging, and how that makes people feel, I think, is challenging. Like the whole thing is just very complex.
And I just think there just needs to be like a balance to the conversation, and that's all I want to bring to it. But it still takes confidence to speak out and just to provide that balance in a really compassionate way.
So it's been 100 episodes. I don't know if you've realised that we've got to 100 episodes. What has been, and I think, in all honesty, if you kind of randomly flipped through every episode and stopped on one and asked me about it, I could tell you something, quite in depth about that episode, because I really feel like we've learnt so much from everyone who has given up their time to speak to us over the course of these 100 episodes. But has there been one particular moment over those 100 episodes that stood out for you?
I would can I say two of them?
Ooh.
Is that allowed?
We'll allow it.
I would say the first most memorable one would be episode 1.
Yes.
Purely from the fact of how awkward it felt to start off with.
Yes.
And it was just like, And so whenever I see people listening back to the first episode, I'm like, make sure you keep listening beyond that because we get better.
Yeah.
So I found
we've warmed up.
But if I want to talk about one that's really from a career perspective memorable would be the words of wisdom for Iona Novak, which was really early on, and would be Andrew Whitehouse in that sort of same sort of timing because they framed everything moving forward. It was like, whose brain's doing the work,
yes.
Whose muscles are the ones doing the work and why ethically we should be following the evidence. It was so compelling how they both put it. And it was, that has framed every single thing forward, which is why every conversation is so important.
Yeah.
I reckon.
Yeah.
I know that I cheated so much in that question.
You really did, but that's
so
okay.
sorry. I picked 3 episodes at the end.
You did. I didn't even realise that. I had the you framed it as 2 and then you snuck a third one in.
I did.
So, okay,
well, what about you? What's your most memorable?
Oh, my most memorable. I think for me it would have to be getting to sit down. Well, no, thinking about how giddy I was before we recorded the episode and then actually getting to sit down with Peter Rosenbaum.
Oh, yes.
And to just have his wisdom wash over me was, life-changing.
Yeah.
I think it was pretty,
that's a really, really
pretty
good
cool.
one.
And I felt like, okay, this is
we had tingles
where
before.
the real
it was
deal.
Just like, oh.
This is Peter Rosenbaum, and he was so warm and friendly and generous with his time and his thoughts, and just came away from that episode on a real high.
Yeah, that was actually really, really cool.
Yeah.
It's a lot of cool episodes. But in terms of memorable, in terms of that sort of almost visceral sense, I think. Yeah, that's a really good one.
But they're all memorable because, like I said, I remember things about all of them, but that was pretty special.
Yeah, I feel so much smarter now. Don't you reckon? Like after 100 episodes, you've spoken about so many different things, so much smarter.
You know who we haven't asked a question of so far this episode?
He's tried a few times.
He'll be ready for it because this is how we run Research Works, right?
That's true.
Instead of telling it to Ed, I thought maybe we could ask Ed.
Ask Ed. That's a good idea. Do you have a question ready for him?
I'm percolating. Do you have one?
Yeah, I have one. This would be maybe more a producing question.
Ooh. We're going to break the fourth wall.
Yeah, that's so true.
Is there a fourth wall in audio podcasting?
He asks good questions. It's annoying.
I'm going to say
look, I think
yes for the purpose of the question.
Yeah, that's right. We're going with that agenda right now.
Yeah.
So, Ed, what is it that you have found through your journey as being a producer? Because up to the time I asked you whether you come on to produce this episode, you've never actually produced podcast episodes before. You've done videos, you've done lots of other things. What do you find has been the best thing about producing the podcast?
To be honest, it's a little bit selfish actually. I think I've had like a huge amount of like personal growth and knowledge in the area of health and like the human body in general. Long story made very, very short, I've actually never sat through a single human biology class. I know nothing about the human body. So I guess when the spool comes about, someone who's not involved in healthcare and doesn't know anything about it's completely true.
It's legit.
It's legit. Yeah.
So sitting through like all these incredible researchers and clinicians who talk very passionately about wanting to make a change, and they do all the scientific evidence to prove particular points, I start to appreciate how much work there is in all of this research to bring something to the fore and make other people's lives better. But through doing that, I've started to understand parts of how the body works, and so that's been great. I just kind of get to sit and listen to it firsthand, which is great.
I'll do a follow-up question on that one.
Ooh.
Do you ever get nervous? Because we genuinely do not prep It's almost a little bit cruel. Yeah. We sort of say, we've got this guest today, we're talking about this. And sometimes it's just he knows about the topic as we get into it, right?
Yeah. He's learning with us.
He's learning with us. So we never prep Ed. That's just genuine. We never give him a question. We don't give him the content. We don't give him the paper beforehand.
It's a bit cruel, really, because we prep ourselves.
We do.
So,
So what you don't see is behind the scenes, I'm just typing into ChatGPT. What question should I ask? Blah, 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 blah.
Sure.
lifting the lid.
Really? That has only just been available.
Yeah, I've had early access for like the last 3 years.
But do you ever get nervous?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, they're incredibly smart people. They know a huge amount about the human body, and I know nothing. So sometimes, like, I think I'm genuinely asking very, very silly questions. So
we appreciate it.
And I try to follow along. Sometimes it's a bit much for someone who's just starting to learn the basics of things. But I think for the most part, people have been really great guests, and I've been able to follow the train of thought relatively well. It's conversational, so it's been facilitated well, and it's not reading a PowerPoint presentation. It's that back and forth conversation that's kind of made it very digestible, which has been great.
Cool.
Well, you are a very patient man. I'm sure there's lots of bloopers on Dana and I's part that you've edited out over the course of the 100 episodes. I'm dreading the day that the blooper reel comes out.
Oh, if you guys cross me like one day.
But none of this would be made possible without you, Ed, and your amazing editing skills and your production skills. So, yes, we are incredibly grateful for your time and effort on the podcast as well.
Yeah, really grateful. Congratulations on making it to 100 too, Ed.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, as we normally do with our podcast, this does bring us to an end.
It does.
Of this 100th episode.
Have you organised streamers, balloons?
Can
to come down from the ceiling?
Yeah. Ed, can you add that to some of the post effects? If we go, ready, 1, 2, 3.
I don't think I've been given a CG budget, so I'm not sure.
We'll talk about that. Because now we just look silly.
We just look silly now, but we did it at the same time.
Yeah.
That's fabulous. But so thank you everyone for coming on the journey with us, for all our new listeners. I hope that gives you a bit of an insight into, I guess, who we are and the heart behind what it is that we do, and we do love doing it.
We do. And hopefully, I'm sure over the course of this episode you've got a sense of how grateful we are for, the opportunity to speak to our wonderful guests, but to also have you, our wonderful listeners, listening and downloading all of these episodes as well. So
it's incredible.
Yeah.
And so if you are new to any of this, please do subscribe. The reason for us saying that is just it does help us in terms of like getting the visibility out there, because every now and then you still meet people who go, I didn't know about this, and leaving a comment also helps, or a review also helps. I think that's really good. I mean, only 5 stars, please, but it does help other people to find it, and that's the whole idea of us doing this.
Absolutely.
So we'll continue back to our usual schedule very, very soon now, and we've got lots of guests lined up for the remainder of this year. But we do have one last really exciting announcement to make. Would you like to say it?
Oh, no, I'll let you say it. Go on.
So next year, Ash and I are both going to be headed to the European Academy of Childhood Disability 2024 in Bruges in Belgium, continuing our partnership in knowledge translation with the EACD. Yeah. And this time, really just integrating the podcast even more so, more guests, more conversations. It's so exciting. I think the fact that it was just so successful, so many people loving listening to it, it just makes it so worthwhile. So
if you're going to be at the conference, get ready, because we are coming to talk to you.
So exciting.
Yeah. And if you aren't able to make the conference, get ready, because we'll have lots of conference guests for you to listen to.
A minimum of 27 episodes again? I don't know.
Well, I think the bar has been set. So
here we go. Yeah. So we're so very excited about that being able to be with people again and making this possible. Yeah. So, but I think that the reason why we're doing it is because you've said it's really important. So we'll be there.
Can't wait.
Yay! That's really cool. So to all of you guys, head to the website if you want to look at any of the episodes we've already been published, if you want to catch up on stuff before we launch into the next part or the second part of the season, I guess you can say. And we'll talk to you all again really soon. So
Can't
take
wait.
care. Bye.
Bye. Just
20 minutes.
keeping it tight. Just 20 minutes. Good job, Frankie.
That was pretty good.
You're going to do the podcast in Flemish though, right?
Hoe gaat het met jou?
Oh, that was actually not a bad effort. Hoe gaat het met je?
Hoe gaat het met jou?
Okay, I need
Got to
to
come back from there.
do some serious lessons.